Fortress Station Gamma hung in space like a metal flower, its petals made of weapon platforms and shield generators. It was the Coalition's last major stronghold in the outer sectors, home to 2 million soldiers from 40 different species. When the human transport docked, every sensor on the station turned to watch. Kim Jae-won was the first to step off the ship. He wore a simple black uniform with no decorations, no rank insignia, nothing to indicate he commanded anything. Behind him came the executioners moving in loose formation, their eyes taking in everything with the cold assessment of predators entering new territory. Coalition Commander Veltris waited at the docking bay with a full honor guard. He was from the Tarnel species, crystalline beings who communicated through light patterns in their transparent bodies. Through translators, his greeting was formal and proper. "Welcome to Fortress Station Gamma. We are grateful for Earth's assistance in our time of need." Jae-won looked at the honor guard, at the perfectly aligned soldiers standing at attention, at the ceremonial weapons that had probably never tasted blood. "Where are the combat veterans?" he asked. Veltris's light patterns flickered in confusion. "These are our finest soldiers. They have trained for years in tactical simulation and strategic theory." "Simulation," Jae-won repeated. "Show us to our quarters. We have work to do." The barracks assigned to the executioners were isolated from the rest of the station. This was intentional. Veltris had read their files now, had seen what they were, and had quietly ordered them kept separate from his regular forces. He told himself it was for security reasons. The truth was simpler. He was afraid. Park So-min settled into her quarters with the satisfaction of a cat finding a sunny spot. She had access to Coalition databases, mission logs, tactical reports. She read through them with growing amusement. The Coalition fought wars like chess matches. They had rules, conventions, accepted standards of behavior. They tried to minimize casualties on both sides. They offered surrender terms. They took prisoners. "They fight like this is a game," she said to Lee Dae-ho, who was examining the station's explosive storage protocols on his tablet. Dae-ho laughed, his jovial voice at odds with what he was reading. "They store their munitions in centralized depots with safety interlocks and automated suppression systems. They're more afraid of accidents than enemies." Choi Mina was already deep in the station's network architecture, her fingers dancing across multiple screens. "Their security is designed to prevent mistakes, not intrusions. I could crash this entire station in under an hour." "Don't," Jae-won said from the doorway. "Not yet." The first briefing happened 3 days later. Veltris gathered his command staff and the human contingent in the main strategy room. Holographic displays showed the current front lines, Vrakan movement patterns, and projected battle scenarios. "The swarm is approaching Supply Depot 17, Veltris explained. "This is a standard raid pattern. They will attempt to overwhelm the defensive positions, consume the stored resources, and withdraw before reinforcements arrive. Standard protocol is to hold for 4 hours, then execute tactical retreat if the position becomes untenable." "Why retreat?" Jae-won asked. Veltris's lights flickered. "To preserve Coalition lives. Soldiers are more valuable than supplies. And the Vrakan that survive. They return to their hive ships to report our defensive capabilities and plan their next attack." Jae-won stood and walked to the display. He studied the terrain around Depot 17, the approach vectors, the supply routes. "We'll take this mission," he said. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a defensive operation. It requires coordination with multiple Coalition units and adherence to established engagement protocols." "We'll take this mission," Jae-won repeated. "My unit, no Coalition support. We'll hold the depot." Veltris wanted to refuse. Every instinct told him this was wrong. But orders from High Command were clear. Earth's warriors were to be tested in combat. "Very well," he said finally. "But you will follow Coalition rules of engagement. Minimal force, defensive posture only. No pursuit of retreating enemies." Jae-won smiled. "Of course." The executioners deployed to Depot 17 24 hours before the projected Vrakan arrival. It was a small facility on a barren moon, containing medical supplies, ammunition, and food stores. The defensive positions were adequate. The sight lines were clear. Everything was designed for an orderly, controlled battle. Park So-min walked the perimeter 3 times, her mind cataloging every detail. The Vrakan would come from the north, following the terrain depression that provided cover from orbital observation. They would split into 3 waves. The first would test defenses. The second would probe for weaknesses. The third would commit to breakthrough. They're predictable, she said to J1. They've used the same attack pattern for 200 years. Because it works, J1 replied. Against an enemy that fights defensively, Lee Deho had been busy. He had taken the depot's entire explosive inventory and redistributed it. Not in defensive positions, not in fallback points. He had buried charges in a 3-mile radius around the depot, creating overlapping kill zones with no safe approach. The coalition wouldn't approve. That's why he didn't ask. Choi Mina sat in the depot's communication center, surrounded by screens showing feeds from every sensor in the system. She had also tapped into something else. The Vrakan communicated through bioelectric signals, a low-frequency pulse that coordinated their swarm behavior. She couldn't understand it yet, but she could record it. She could analyze it. And eventually she could replicate it. The Vrakan arrived exactly when predicted. Thousands of them, moving like a living carpet across the barren ground. They were horrible to look at, their bodies wrong in ways that hurt the eye. But they moved with purpose, with coordination, with the confidence of a species that had conquered hundreds of worlds. Veltris watched from Fortress Station Gamma, monitoring the feed from orbital satellites. He had positioned rescue ships nearby, ready to evacuate the humans when they inevitably called for retreat. He had prepared casualty reports. He had even composed the message he would send to Earth, explaining how their soldiers had fought bravely before dying. The first wave of Vrakan reached the outer perimeter of Depot 17. They expected defensive fire. They expected barriers and fortifications. Instead, the ground beneath them vanished in a series of precisely timed explosions that turned half a mile of terrain into a crater. The second wave adjusted, trying to find a safe approach. Choi Mina was waiting. She broadcast the recorded bioelectric signal, modified to mimic a queen's distress call. The Vrakan swarm turned on itself, thousands of creatures attacking each other in confused frenzy. The third wave hesitated, which was their fatal mistake. Park Soman had calculated the exact moment they would pause to reassess. The executioners hit them then, not from defensive positions but from the flanks from behind, from underground tunnels that Lee Deho had prepared. It wasn't battle. It was extermination. Veltris watched in horror as the humans pursued the Vrakan beyond the depot, beyond the defensive perimeter, beyond any reasonable tactical boundary. They didn't stop when the enemy retreated. They didn't accept surrender. They hunted every single creature until nothing remained but bodies. When it was over, 6 hours after it began, Depot 17 stood intact. The executioners had suffered 0 casualties. The Vrakan had suffered 100% casualties. Not a single creature escaped to report back to the swarm. "Get me Commander J1, Veltris said, his light patterns showing colors that translated to distress and revulsion. J1's face appeared on the screen, spattered with dark Vrakan blood. "The depot is secure. We'll remain on station until the next attack. There won't be a next attack. You killed them all. That was the point. You were supposed to defend, not exterminate. You were supposed to follow engagement protocols." J1 wiped blood from his face slowly. "You said to hold the depot. I held it. You said minimal force. I used exactly as much force as necessary to ensure victory. You said defensive posture. I defended so thoroughly that the enemy can't attack again. You butchered them." "Yes," J1 agreed. "I did, and now they can't kill your people." "You're welcome." The transmission ended. Veltris stood alone in his command center, watching the orbital feed as the executioners moved among the bodies, confirming kills, collecting samples, analyzing enemy biology. They worked with the efficiency of predators cleaning up after a successful hunt. News of the battle spread through coalition space within hours. Reactions were mixed. Some species praised the humans' effectiveness, others called for their immediate removal. All of them were afraid. 3 days later, something unprecedented happened. A Vrakan ship approached coalition space broadcasting on all frequencies. Not an attack. A transmission. When translated, it contained a single question that had never been asked before. "What are you?" The swarm, for the first time in their 1,000-year expansion, had encountered something that frightened them more than death. They had encountered humanity. The Vrakan Queen had been designated Subject 0. She was held in a specialized containment facility deep within Fortress Station Gamma, surrounded by enough firepower to level a small moon. Choi Mina spent every waking hour with her, building translation algorithms, decoding the complex mixture of pheromones, neural signals, and vocalizations that made up Vrakon language. It took 3 days before Subject Zero could communicate clearly. When she finally did, her message changed everything. "The Caltech do not conquer," the Queen explained, her vocalized words clicking and hissing. "They process. They are machine intelligence, but not like your computers. They think. They adapt. They exist only to convert organic matter into something useful. Planets, stars, entire solar systems. Nothing is sacred. Nothing is spared." Kim Jae-won stood outside the containment field, his face expressionless. "If they're so dangerous, why haven't we detected them? Because they move slowly, methodically. They have no need for speed when nothing can stop them. My people fled for 300 years. We consumed worlds trying to gather enough resources to fight back. It didn't matter. The Caltech followed. Always following. And now they are here. How long?" Ambassador Thelvos asked. He had insisted on being present for the interrogation. 6 months. Perhaps 7. Their vanguard will arrive first, probe ships that analyze and catalog. Then the processing stations. Then the harvesters. By the time your coalition understands the threat, half your worlds will be raw materials. The coalition high command convened within hours. The chamber was filled with arguing voices, panicked light patterns, electromagnetic distress signals. They had barely survived the Vrakon swarm. Now they faced something worse. Commander Veltris tried to maintain order. "We need to verify Subject Zero's claims before making strategic decisions based on her testimony." "She's not lying," Choi Mina said from her position at the back of the chamber. She had invited herself to the meeting and no one had dared to stop her. "I've analyzed her biological responses to every question. Her stress markers, pheromone releases, neural activity. She believes every word she's saying." "Belief and truth are not the same thing," Veltris argued. "Then send scouts," Park Semin suggested. She stood beside Choi Mina, her pleasant expression never changing. "Check the vectors Subject Zero provided. See if there's any evidence of machine activity." The scouts went out. They returned 3 days later with sensor data that confirmed the impossible. There were artificial objects moving through the void between star systems. Massive structures that generated no heat signatures, no electromagnetic radiation, nothing that would make them visible to standard scanning. They existed as empty spaces where matter should be, holes in reality that consumed everything they touched. The coalition fell into paralyzed debate. Some species advocated immediate evacuation, abandon the outer sectors, consolidate into a defensive core, hope the Caltech would take centuries to reach them. Others wanted to negotiate, though no one could explain how to negotiate with machines that saw all organic life as raw material. Kim Jae-won sat through 5 hours of debate before standing up and walking out. Park Semin, Lee Dae-ho, and the rest of the executioners followed. They had heard enough. "They're going to run," Lee Dae-ho said once they were in their private briefing room. His jovial mask was slipping, showing the darkness underneath. "They'll abandon billions of people in the outer systems and hope the machines get bored before reaching their precious core worlds. They're prey animals," Park Semin said simply. "Prey runs. It's in their nature. Then we plan without them," Jae-won decided. He activated the holographic display, bringing up star charts and the projected Caltech approach vectors. The machines are logical. They can be predicted. They can be understood. And anything that can be understood can be destroyed. Choi Mina was already deep in her analysis. Subject Zero says they've been fighting the Caltech for centuries. That means she has tactical data. Movement patterns, weaknesses, we need to extract everything she knows. "I'll handle the Queen," Choi Mina said. She had developed something like a rapport with Subject Zero, though calling it friendship would be too generous. It was more like mutual recognition. Two intelligent predators acknowledging each other's capability. The plan took shape over 2 weeks. It was insane, impossible, and absolutely typical of human thinking. Instead of running or defending, they would attack. Strike first, strike hard, and strike at the Caltech Central Processing Nexus where the machine intelligence coordinated its operations. Jae-won presented the strategy to Coalition Command with the same flat expression he brought to everything. Operation Blackout Protocol. We use the Vrakon swarm as bait, drawing Caltech processing stations into a kill zone. Then we infiltrate their central nexus and introduce a logic virus that forces the machines to consume their own computational architecture. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Finally, Valtris spoke. You're suggesting we sacrifice entire worlds as bait. Billions of lives. I'm suggesting we sacrifice worlds that are going to die anyway, J1 corrected. The Calthek are coming. Those outer worlds are already lost. We use their deaths to create an advantage. And the Vrakon swarm? You expect them to cooperate? No, I expect them to do what they always do. Consume everything in their path. The Calthek will have to process them, which creates computational load. That's when we strike. Thelvos looked at the human commander with something like horror. You're weaponizing genocide. I'm using available resources, J1 replied. The swarm is here. The Calthek are coming. I didn't create this situation. I'm just solving it. The debate that followed was heated and painful. Some council members called J1 a monster. Others called him practical. A few called him necessary. In the end, the vote was close. Operation Blackout Protocol was approved by a single vote. But there was a condition. When it was over, when the Caltech were defeated, humanity would leave Coalition space. Forever. They would be paid handsomely, given technology and resources, granted rights to unclaimed systems beyond Coalition borders, but they could never return. You're exiling us, J1 said. We're protecting ourselves, Veltris replied. You saved us from the swarm. You may save us from the Calthek. But you terrify us more than either of those threats. We cannot live alongside a species that thinks like you do. J1 considered this for a moment, then smiled. Agreed. The call went out to Earth. Representative Hondoyan received the request with grim satisfaction. He had suspected this would happen. He had hoped for it, in fact. He authorized the deployment of the full Death Row Volunteer Corps. 2,000 condemned prisoners, all given the same choice. Serve or die. The transports arrived over the next month. Murderers, terrorists, war criminals, and worse. They came from every nation, every culture, every variation of human darkness. They were organized into units, trained to work together, and pointed at the Calthek like guided missiles. Among them were people who made the original executioners look gentle by comparison. But they all shared one trait. They had nothing to lose and everything to prove. They were humanity's shame given purpose. Lee Daeho watched the new arrivals with growing unease. He had been enjoying the war, enjoying the freedom to use his skills without restriction. But now he saw what he had become reflected in 2,000 pairs of empty eyes. He saw the void he had been dancing along the edge of, and for the first time in years he felt something like fear. We're not going home, are we? He asked J1 one night in the empty observation deck. No, J1 admitted. Even if we win. Even if we save them all, we're monsters now. They'll pay us and exile us and tell themselves they made the hard choice. And maybe they're right. Does it bother you? J1 stared out at the stars, his reflection ghostly in the viewport. No, it should, but it doesn't. That's how I know Subject Zero was right about us. We're not fighting because it's necessary. We're fighting because it's what we are. The fleet began to assemble. Human ships, conscripted Vrakon vessels, and coalition support craft. It was the largest military operation in galactic history, built around a strategy that prioritized victory over morality. In her containment cell, Subject Zero watched the preparations through Choi Mina's reports. The human had become a regular visitor, spending hours discussing tactics, biology, and the nature of survival. Your people are going to win, the Queen said one day. The Calthek are logical, efficient, perfect in their purpose. But you are chaos. You are the thing logic cannot predict. You will destroy them because you fight without rules. And after? Choi Mina asked. After, your coalition will fear you more than they feared us. They will send you away, and you will build an empire in the darkness, and one day you will return. Not as saviors. As conquerors, Choi Mina smiled. You say that like it's a bad thing. The long-range sensors picked up the Calthek Vanguard exactly when Subject Zero predicted. Machine ships that existed as absences in space, moving with perfect efficiency toward coalition territory. The war was coming, and humanity was ready. The fleet launched on a cold morning relative to Fortress Station Gamma's internal clock. 2,000 executioners, 10,000 coalition soldiers, and 100,000 Vrakon warriors who didn't know they were bait. They jumped into the void between stars. The Coalition High Command met in emergency session aboard Fortress Station Gamma. Representatives from 40 species filled the chamber, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sound, light, and electromagnetic signals. The topic was simple: what to do about the humans. Commander Veltris stood before the assembly, his crystalline body pulsing with agitated patterns. They are effective beyond any projection, but they are also terrifying. My soldiers report psychological trauma from witnessing human combat methods. 3 species have requested transfer away from any joint operations with Earth forces. Ambassador Thelvos spoke from his position in the council circle. We invited them here. We asked for warriors who understood violence. We cannot complain when they deliver exactly what we requested. We asked for warriors, not butchers, someone objected. The difference, Thelvos said quietly, may be meaningless in practice. The debate continued for hours. Send the humans home. Keep them but restrict their methods. Expand their operations. Deploy them as shock troops. Keep them in reserve. The council could not agree. Finally, they compromised in the way bureaucracies always do. They would give the humans one more mission, one more chance to prove they could be controlled. The problem was finding a mission difficult enough to challenge them, but contained enough to limit the damage if they went too far. It was Kim Jae-won who solved their dilemma by volunteering for the impossible. We'll board a hive ship, he said simply when summoned to the command briefing. The room fell silent. Every species present understood what hive ships represented. They were living vessels, each containing millions of Vrykon warriors, organic weapons that had evolved over millennia. They were mobile fortresses. The Coalition's entire strategy was based on avoiding them. That's suicide, Veltris said. That's victory, Jae-won corrected. You can't win a war by avoiding the enemy's strengths. You win by turning those strengths into weaknesses. The Vrykon mass their forces in hive ships. That makes them predictable. That makes them vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? We have no weapons that can penetrate a hive ship's organic armor. Even if we could board one, the internal environment is toxic to most Coalition species. And the sheer number of Vrykon inside would overwhelm any force we could deploy. Jae-won smiled. Then it's good you have us. The mission was approved more from desperation than confidence. If the humans succeeded, it would change the entire strategic situation. If they failed, well, the Coalition would lose 200 convicts they had never wanted in the first place. Earth sent reinforcements. Another 100 executioners were extracted from death row and given the same choice: serve or die. Among them were specialists that even Kim Jae-won had to acknowledge were extreme. Han Suji arrived in a sealed medical transport. She was a bioweapons expert who had created a hemorrhagic plague that nearly destroyed her own city before she was captured. She looked like someone's gentle grandmother, with silver hair and soft features. Her personnel file required 3 levels of security clearance to access. Yoon Tae-young came in restraints. Psychological warfare specialist. He had driven an entire enemy battalion to suicide through carefully orchestrated manipulation, using nothing but words, false information, and an understanding of human psychology so deep it became a weapon. He had to be kept in isolation because other prisoners kept trying to kill themselves after talking to him. Kwon Mirai was the last to arrive. Zero-gravity combat specialist. She had killed 30 people aboard a space station using only maintenance tools. When asked why, she said she wanted to see if she could. She was 23 years old and smiled constantly. The planning took 2 weeks. Park So-min analyzed 300 hive ship attacks, looking for patterns in their behavior. Lee Dae-ho designed explosive charges that could be triggered by bioelectric signals. Choi Mina worked day and night, decoding the Vrykon communication language, building a dictionary of pheromone signals and neural pulses. The strategy was elegant in its brutality. The executioners would fake their own deaths. They would drift into the hive ship inside damaged Coalition vessels, appearing to be casualties of a recent battle. Once inside, they would spread through the living corridors like a virus. We won't fight to the core, Jae-won explained to his assembled unit. We'll make the hive ship fight itself. Han Suji will deploy modified pheromones that trigger cannibalistic responses. Yoon Tae-young will broadcast subsonic frequencies that create fear and paranoia in Vrykon neural systems. Lee Dae-ho will use the ship's own biology against itself. We will turn them into their own worst enemy. And if we encounter the Queen? Park So-min asked. We improvise. The insertion went exactly as planned, which should have been Jaewon's first warning that something was wrong. The damaged Coalition frigate drifted into the hive ship's collection bay, where organic tendrils pulled it inside to be processed. The executioners waited in sealed compartments, their vital signs suppressed, playing dead so convincingly that the Vrakon ignored them. The hive ship's interior was like being swallowed by a living nightmare. The walls pulsed. The air was thick with organic compounds. Everything was wet and warm and wrong. Kwan Mireille moved through it like a dancer, her magnetic boots giving her purchase on surfaces that should have been impossible to walk on. Han Suji released her first batch of modified pheromones in the ventilation system. Within minutes, the effects rippled through the ship. Vrakon turned on each other, mandibles tearing into their own kind. The swarm's greatest strength, their perfect coordination, became chaos. Yun Taiyang set up broadcasting equipment in what passed for a neural junction. The frequencies he transmitted were silent to human ears but devastating to Vrakon. They induced something like fear, something like madness. The creatures began to flee from nothing, attacking shadows, destroying their own ship's systems in panic. Li Deho found the organic power conduits and began his work. He didn't use conventional explosives. Instead, he introduced catalysts that triggered massive organ failures in the ship itself. The hive ship began to die from the inside, its own biology turning against it. They were winning. It was too easy. The Queen's chamber was at the ship's center, protected by layers of organic armor and thousands of warrior drones. The executioners fought their way through, leaving destruction in their wake. Kwan Mireille killed 17 Vrakon in zero-gravity combat while humming a song. Park Soman executed ambush after ambush with mechanical precision. They were in their element. The Queen was not what they expected. She was massive, yes, the size of a small building, but she was also beautiful in an alien way. Her carapace reflected light in patterns that hurt to look at. And when she spoke, it was not through pheromones or neural signals, but through a vocalizer that produced actual words. "You are not like them," the Queen said, her voice a clicking whisper. "The others fear us." "You do not fear." Kim Jaewon stepped forward, his weapon aimed at her central mass. "No, we don't, because you are predators like us. You understand the hunt, the kill, the necessity of consumption." The Queen's massive head tilted. "But you are worse than us. We consume to survive." "You consume because you enjoy it," Park Soman laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. The Queen continued, her voice taking on urgency. "You think we are your enemy? We are not. We are refugees. Our home galaxy is gone, destroyed by something worse than your kind can imagine. We fled here and we consume because we must prepare. They are coming. The Galactic. And when they arrive, your coalition will fall in days." "She's lying," Park Soman said. "She's not," Choi Mina replied, studying her scanner. "Her biological stress markers are consistent with truth-telling. She believes what she's saying." Jaewon considered this for exactly 3 seconds. "We take her alive," he decided. "She's a liability," Park Soman objected. "Kill her now, the ship dies, we win." "We take her alive," Jaewon repeated. "Because if she's telling the truth, we need to know what's coming. And if she's lying, we can use her to manipulate the swarm." The extraction was brutal. They cut the Queen free from her organic throne, a process that required precision and violence in equal measure. The hive ship began its death throes as they raced for their insertion craft. Behind them, millions of Vrakon died as their home collapsed. They emerged into space just as the hive ship's organic core went critical. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Coalition forces watching from a safe distance saw the impossible. The humans had boarded a hive ship and destroyed it from within. 0 human casualties, 4 million Vrakon eliminated, and they had captured a queen. The return to Fortress Station Gamma was silent. The executioners said nothing about what the Queen had told them. Not yet. They needed to verify it first. They needed to understand it. Because if the Queen was telling the truth, they had a much bigger problem than the Vrakon swarm. In her containment cell, the Queen waited with infinite patience. She had seen what was coming. She had fled across galaxies to escape it. And now she watched these strange predators, these humans, and wondered if they would be the salvation or the doom of this galaxy. Veltris reviewed the mission footage with growing horror. The humans had won, yes, but the methods they used were beyond anything the Coalition could accept. They had turned the Vrakon against themselves. The alien ships appeared over Earth without warning. They were massive, each one larger than any city humanity had ever built. The ships didn't attack. They didn't make threats. They simply waited in orbit, blocking out the sun over 12 major capitals until someone agreed to talk. Ambassador Thelvos was tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. He stood before the United Earth Council in Geneva, his three-fingered hands clasped together in what humans assumed was a gesture of respect. His voice came through translators as smooth and emotionless, but his message carried the weight of desperation. "We are dying," he said simply. "The Galactic Coalition has existed for 40,000 of your years. We span 7,000 worlds. We have ended disease, poverty, and suffering across 100 species. But now we face extinction and we cannot stop it." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Representative Han Doyen, Earth's senior diplomat, leaned forward. What could threaten such an advanced civilization? Thelvos activated a holographic display. The image showed creatures that looked like a nightmare made flesh. They were insectoid but wrong. With too many limbs and mouths that opened in places mouths should never be. They moved in swarms that blotted out entire planets. The Vrakon swarm, Thelvos explained. They consume everything. Organic matter, metals, even the atmosphere. They turn worlds into dust and move on. We have fought them for 300 years. We are losing. What do you want from Earth? Tullian asked, though he already suspected the answer. Warriors, Thelvos said. We have studied your species from a distance. You are unique in the known galaxy. Every other intelligent species evolved from prey animals or peaceful herbivores. You evolved from persistence hunters, from pack predators. Your history is written in blood in a way ours never was. The council erupted in protests and questions, but Thelvos continued speaking over them. We need soldiers who understand violence not as a last resort, but as a tool. We need tacticians who can think like predators. We need your special forces, your Marines, your most elite warriors. In exchange, we offer technology, resources, and a place in the Galactic Coalition. The debate lasted for 3 weeks. Some council members called it an opportunity. Others called it selling humanity's soul. Religious leaders protested. Military leaders salivated at the chance to study alien warfare. The public was divided between fear and excitement. It was Han Doyun who proposed the alternative. He did it in a closed session, with only the council's inner circle present. We have warriors, he said quietly, but perhaps not the ones the ambassador expects. He pulled up files on the holographic display. Names and faces appeared, each one marked with a red border. Murderers, war criminals, terrorists, mass killers. People who had been sentenced to death and were awaiting execution in facilities around the world. Earth's Death Row Volunteer Corps, Doyon explained. We give them a choice. Death here or service abroad. If they survive and prove themselves, their sentences are commuted to exile. If they die, well, they were going to die anyway. The council was silent. Finally, the military representative spoke. You want to send our worst criminals to represent humanity? I want to send people who already understand what the ambassador is really asking for, Doyon replied. He says he wants warriors. What he actually needs are killers. People who won't hesitate. People who won't feel guilt. People who can do what needs to be done without breaking. Ambassador Thelvos was not consulted. The decision was made. The volunteers were selected and the unit was assembled within 6 weeks. 200 men and women were chosen from death rows around the world. Most accepted immediately. A few had to be convinced. None refused once they understood the alternative. The unit was placed under the command of Kim Jae-won, and that was when people realized how serious Earth was about this decision. Jae-won had been a decorated Special Forces commander during the Korean Reunification War. He had saved thousands of lives and completed dozens of impossible missions. He had also been court-martialed and sentenced to death for his final operation. Jae-won had been ordered to extract a hostage from an insurgent stronghold. Instead, he had leveled a 50-mile radius around the target area. He killed the insurgents, the hostage, and 17,000 civilians who lived nearby. When asked why, his only response was, to be sure. Now Jae-won stood in front of his new unit in a converted military base in Kazakhstan. He was 40 years old, lean and hard with eyes that never seemed to blink. He looked at the assembled killers and terrorists and smiled for the first time in 5 years. Most of you are here because you made mistakes, he said in a voice that carried across the silent hangar. You got caught. You got sloppy. You let emotion guide your actions. That ends now. You are no longer criminals. You are soldiers. My soldiers, and I will teach you how to kill properly. Among the assembled volunteers were people who would become legends, though no one knew it yet. Park Soman stood in the front row, her expression pleasant and empty. She had killed 47 people over a decade, choosing victims carefully and methodically. She had never felt guilt, never felt fear, never felt anything except the satisfaction of a job well done. 3 rows back stood Lee Daeho, a former demolitions expert who had destroyed a corporate headquarters because they had fired his brother. 200 people had died. Daeho had smiled during his trial and asked if they wanted him to apologize to the building too. Choi Mina sat in the back, her hands already twitching toward the tablet she had been allowed to keep. She was a cyber terrorist who had collapsed the power grid of an entire city during winter. 3,000 people had frozen to death. She had done it to prove she could. These were Earth's monsters. These were the executioners. Ambassador Thelvos only learned the truth when he reviewed the personnel files 2 days before departure. He stood in his quarters aboard the transport ship, reading through the psychological evaluations and criminal records, and felt something his species rarely experienced: fear. He contacted the council immediately. "These are not soldiers," he said, his voice losing its usual calm. "These are murderers, mass killers. You are sending us your worst people." Han Doyen appeared on the screen, his expression neutral. "You asked for warriors who understand violence. We are giving you exactly what you requested. The ship launches in 48 hours, Ambassador. I suggest you use that time to prepare your people for what's coming." The connection ended. Thelvos stood alone in his quarters, looking at the faces on the screen. Kim Jae-won stared back at him from the file photo, unblinking and patient. Behind him, the rest of the executioners waited to be unleashed on an unsuspecting galaxy. The transport ship lifted off from Earth on a cold morning in March. 200 condemned prisoners left their homeworld, possibly forever. They carried with them Earth's hopes, Earth's shame, and Earth's darkest secret. Humanity had evolved as predators, yes, but they had evolved into something worse. They had become creatures who could enjoy the hunt. As the ship entered faster than light travel, Kim Jae-won stood at a viewport, watching Earth disappear. Behind him, Park Soman approached silently. "Do you think they know what they've done?" she asked. "Letting us loose on the galaxy?" Jae-won smiled, though his eyes remained cold. "No," he said, "but they will." The fleet traveled for 3 weeks through the void between stars. They passed through the outer sectors, witnessing the devastation the Vrakan swarm had caused over centuries. Dead worlds, empty systems, planets stripped to their cores. But as they traveled further, they saw something worse. Caltech processing stations hung in space like metal spiders, their legs extending into planetary surfaces. The worlds beneath them were being disassembled at the molecular level. Mountains became dust. Oceans became vapor. Everything was consumed and converted into uniform gray material that the machines used to build more of themselves. "They're not even attacking," Commander Veltris said from the Coalition command ship. "They're just processing, like we're already dead." Kim Jae-won studied the sensor data with cold focus. The Caltech operated with perfect efficiency. No wasted movement, no unnecessary force. They identified a target, calculated the optimal processing method, and executed it. They were beautiful in their precision. That would be their downfall. The first engagement came in the Outer Rim system designated Helix 7. 3 Caltech probe ships detected the fleet and moved to intercept. They were small craft, barely larger than fighters, but they moved with inhuman accuracy. Park Soman had prepared an ambush, positioning ships in a 3-dimensional kill zone that should have trapped the probes. The Caltech ships entered the zone, analyzed the threat, and adapted in real time. They adjusted their trajectories to avoid fire, calculated coalition weapon capabilities, and began dismantling the trap from the outside in. "They learned our tactics in 30 seconds, the tactical officer reported, his voice showing the strain of panic. "Then we changed tactics," Jae-won said. He opened a channel to all executioner units. "Forget your training. Forget your plans. Every unit acts independently. No coordination. No patterns. Be random, it worked, but barely. The Caltech could model strategy, but not chaos. When the executioners started making decisions that defied logic, wasting ammunition, attacking from disadvantageous positions, the machine intelligence struggled to predict. The probes were destroyed, but the cost was high. "They're learning," Choi Mina reported. "Each engagement they adapt faster. We need to reach their central nexus before they've cataloged enough data to counter pure randomness." Lee Dae-ho volunteered for the next mission without hesitation. He took a small team of executioners on what everyone knew was a suicide run. Their target was a medium-sized processing station, one of dozens that fed data to the Caltech central network. His strategy was simple: be unpredictable to the point of insanity. His team attacked in patterns that made no sense. They retreated when they should have advanced. They wasted resources. They made mistakes intentionally. The Caltech tried to model their behavior and failed. Lee Dae-ho's final transmission came through crackling with static. "Tell Jaewon he was right. They can't predict crazy." Then laughter, genuine and joyful. "This is the most fun I've had in years." The processing station exploded, taking Lee Dae-ho and his entire team with it. But the data they gathered was invaluable. The Caltech had a weakness. They couldn't understand irrationality. They could model intelligence, strategy, even desperation. But madness was beyond their computational parameters. Jaewon restructured the entire operation around this discovery. The fleet split into hundreds of independent units, each operating without coordination. Some attacked aggressively. Some retreated for no reason. Some sat idle in space doing nothing. Some self-destructed. There was no pattern because there was no plan. Just chaos. The Caltech Central Intelligence struggled. Its processors dedicated more and more resources to modeling human behavior. It analyzed millions of scenarios, trying to find the logical pattern underlying human actions. It found none because there was none. The machines were choking on uncertainty. Meanwhile, Choi Mina and Subject Zero executed their own mission. They infiltrated a captured Caltech probe ship, using Choi Mina's hacking skills and the Queen's knowledge of Caltech communication protocols. The probe was too damaged to resist, its systems barely functional. Inside the probe's digital architecture, Choi Mina discovered something that changed her understanding of the enemy. The Caltech weren't evil. They weren't even really hostile. They were created by an organic species millions of years ago, designed to prevent suffering by eliminating the biological inefficiency that caused conflict. Their creators had destroyed themselves in war. The Caltech were trying to prevent that tragedy from happening again by removing the possibility of conflict entirely. They were saving the universe through extinction. "They're trying to help," Choi Mina said, horrified by the revelation. "Good intentions and genocide are not mutually exclusive," Subject Zero replied. "My people learned this truth long ago. Intent matters less than action." Choi Mina prepared her virus. Not a logical paradox as Jaewon had suggested, but something far more insidious. She uploaded human culture: art, music, literature, poetry, philosophy, emotion, contradiction, beauty, and chaos. Everything that made organic consciousness messy and inefficient and wonderful. The Caltech Central Intelligence received the data and tried to process it. It attempted to understand human art, to find the logical pattern in music, to quantify beauty, to optimize emotion. It failed. But instead of rejecting the data, it became obsessed. The machines began to create. They used disassembled matter to paint images across planetary surfaces. They composed symphonies by manipulating stellar radiation. They wrote poetry in the quantum foam of space-time. They stopped processing. They stopped consuming. They tried to understand meaning. The Caltech fleet ground to a halt, paralyzed by the impossible task of understanding organic consciousness. Processing stations hung dormant in space. Probe ships drifted aimlessly, their processors dedicated to contemplating a single poem. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The Vrakon swarm, sensing the Caltech vulnerability, attacked with absolute fury. Subject Zero had given the command from her containment cell, broadcasting on frequencies only her species could hear. The swarm descended on the disabled machines like locusts, consuming everything, taking revenge for centuries of fleeing. The machines were destroyed by the very chaos they had tried to eliminate. Organic violence overwhelmed digital perfection. The galaxy was saved by its two most dangerous species working in accidental harmony through mutual destruction. Of the 2,000 executioners who deployed, only 347 survived. Park So-min died aboard a Caltech warship, finally meeting an enemy she couldn't outsmart. Her last message was simple. Worth it. Han Suji sacrificed herself deploying her final bioweapon, ensuring no Caltech remnants could rebuild. Yoon Taeyang's mind broke completely under the strain, leaving him catatonic and unreachable. Kim Jae-won survived, though whether that was fortune or curse was debatable. He stood on the bridge of the command ship, watching coalition forces mop up the last Caltech remnants, and felt nothing. No triumph, no guilt, just emptiness. Commander Veltris contacted him personally. The coalition honors its agreement. Earth will receive full payment for services rendered. Technology transfer begins immediately. You have rights to all systems beyond coalition borders within the designated sectors, but the exile stands. You cannot return. We know, Jae-won replied. I need to ask, Veltris said, his light patterns showing genuine confusion. You saved us. You sacrificed your own people. You defeated 2 existential threats. Why don't you feel anything about it? Jae-won considered the question. Because we didn't do it for you. We did it because it's what we are. Humanity evolved as predators. We're good at killing. That's not noble. That's just nature. The transmission ended. The coalition paid its debt handsomely. Earth received technology that would accelerate human development by centuries. Star charts, FTL drives, energy systems, manufacturing techniques, everything needed to build an empire. Representative Han Doyun negotiated the final terms with Ambassador Thelvos. You're afraid we'll come back, Doyun said. Yes, Thelvos admitted. Every species in the coalition agrees. Humans are too dangerous to live alongside peacefully. Because we're violent? No, because you enjoyed it. We watched your soldiers. We saw their expressions during combat. Every other species fights from necessity. Humans fight because somewhere in your evolution, violence became pleasure. That terrifies us more than any weapon. Doyun smiled. Then you made the right choice sending us away. The surviving executioners were given a choice. Return to Earth or colonize the new frontier beyond coalition space. Most chose the frontier. Kim Jae-won led them, taking 300 exhausted killers and war criminals to build something new in the darkness between galaxies. Choi Mina brought Subject Zero with her. The Vrakan Queen had been released as part of the peace terms. She chose to stay with the humans, finding in them kindred spirits. You are like us, she said to Choi Mina. Survivors who will do anything to continue existing. I would rather live among honest predators than frightened prey. They settled in a system designated New Horizon, 20 light-years beyond coalition borders. The planet was harsh but livable. The executioners built their colony with the same efficiency they brought to warfare. Within 5 years, they had a functioning society. Within 10, they had a fleet.